Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 15 minutes with Bryan Finster. Stay tuned. We'll talk about a lot of cool stuff today about SAFe and metrics and how to move at the pace relevance and track that work and see if we're on the right track. So stay tuned. We'll get started in 15 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. So stay tuned. We have Bryan join us to talk about metrics and Dora metrics and safe. And we'll see how to actually measure work. So, if you're bringing value into this world, that's going to be fun. So stay tuned. We'll get started in about 10 minutes. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in about 8 minutes. In the meantime, if you want to put your name and your company and what you do, we can highlight you in the comment section below. Also, if you have questions for Bryan, we have quite a few questions already from LinkedIn, but if you have more questions, please make sure you put them into the comment section below as well. Stay tuned. We'll get started soon. Thank you for joining. Make sure you join the ama.preventbreach.com/register to get notifications on the next events. We're going to have Lauren Nasserberger join very soon, and also Jay Bonchi, the Air Force CTO as well. So this is going to be a lot of fun. A lot of great people coming on the show in the next few weeks. So make sure you register as well. Stay tuned. Bye-bye. Thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. In the meantime, if you want to put into the comment section below your name and who you're with, we can highlight you on the screen here. But also, if you have questions, type the question, start with a Q so we know it's a question. And we'll be asking those questions live to Bryan Finster in a few minutes. So stay tuned. We'll get started soon. Thank you for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This is Nick Shalom. We're going to get started in about 3-4 minutes. Please stay tuned. We're going to speak with Bryan Finster today about metrics and Dora and Safe and all that good stuff. Make sure you ask your questions in the comment section below. I'll start with a Q. And then if you want to share you here and provide your name and company you're with, we can highlight you on the screen as well. Thanks. Stay tuned. Bye-bye. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Stay tuned. We'll get started with Bryan Finster here, talk about metrics and Dora and Safe and all that good stuff. If you have questions about Safe, about metrics, how to measure work, feel free to ask the questions in the chat below. Start with a Q. And also, if you want to highlight who you're with and that you're here, you can do that too on the comment section so we can highlight you as well. Stay tuned just a couple of minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this episode of In the Nick of Time with Bryan Finster. Today, we'll be talking about very interesting things when it comes to metrics and Dora metrics and Safe and how to actually move at the pace of relevance and track that work you're doing to see if you actually bring value into this world, or if you're just wasting taxpayer money or your funding. So this is going to be fun. Bryan and I have known each other for a few years now. For some reason, we managed to convince Bryan to come work in the government, leaving Walmart, where he was having a very successful career. So we'll see what led him to take the big jump and come and make a difference in the U.S. government. So this is going to be fun. All right. So before we get started, like I said, if you have questions, make sure you ask the questions in the chat. We have quite a few from LinkedIn, but start with a Q, and we'll know it's a question. And if you just want to say you're here and share your name and the company you're with, what you guys do, if you want, you can do that as well, and we'll be able to highlight you on the screen. I know I also wanted to share the link to register for this AMA in the Nic of Time show. You go to ama.preventbridge.com/register, and you can register for this show. We're going to have pretty amazing guests in the next few weeks, so you don't want to miss that. We have Lauren Nelsenberger, Air Force CIO, joining. We have Jay Bonchi, the Air Force CTO, joining. And we're going to have also John Olson, the first Chief Data and AI Officer of the Air Force and Space Force, also join us as well. So a lot of pretty amazing people joining. Next week, we're going to have also a pretty amazing guest talk about low code, no code. And you know, I'm not a big fan of low code, no code, so that's going to be an interesting debate. So we're going to share a few thoughts. And in fact, I think you're going to find it very interesting because Anand, who is joining us next week, the CEO of Crowdbotics, is actually very smart, and he has some of the answers I was looking for when it comes to the adoption of low code, no code. So now also we launched the in the Nic of Time LinkedIn page. So we'll love it if you could also follow it. That's going to help us build momentum. We're going to be posting dedicated content there as well. So it's going to be fun. I wanted to say hi again to all of you joining, and many of you joining every episode. And if you miss it, of course, it's on YouTube and LinkedIn, so you can always watch them again. It's always good to be able to go back and see some of the recordings to see if you missed something. So, all right. So now let's see. We're gonna bring a friend on the screen. Let's do that first. And I'm going to put you on top because you're more important than me. Hey, Bryan. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to bring the slide about you because you're a very modest guy. In fact, I told you many times you're too modest. And I think you told me you were always struggling with that concept of always believe you didn't belong where you were supposed to be, and that you were not good enough to be here. But I'm telling you, you're good enough to be here and beyond. So that's all good. 20 years developing and operating supply chain solutions for large enterprises. Most recently at Walmart, until you decide to help the largest organization on the planet, which is the DoD. And you stayed a long time at Walmart, and it took some convincing, but not too much. I felt like you were pretty ready to come and make a difference, and so you'll tell us why. You were part of the team that piloted the CD, continuous delivery at Walmart, and you had a real focus on the structure, the technical practice, the architecture, of course teamwork, all the quality that you have to push for the best culture to get this stuff done. And of course, you founded and led the Walmart DevOps Dojo, where you had teams and the leadership working on solving problems. And you joined Defense Unicorns. That was probably the only mistake of your career, but that's fine. 2021. I have to say that just for Rob, So 2021 to help Platform One improve the outcomes with Platform One, and really focus also on the metrics and the delivering capability to the warfighter. But something funny you've done, and you created this party site, Scale Agile DevOps, and we'll talk about SAFE today, so that's going to be interesting. And for people that don't know, you should check out scaleagiledevops.com, and it's a party site, so don't think it's real, but I guess it's real enough. And then of course the most amazing stuff I've seen recently that you've done is the minimumcd.org and the Dojo Consortium, I can't say that, .org as well. And you have a blog. So let me remove for a second the name so we can see here. So of course people can follow you on LinkedIn, and you're very active on LinkedIn, doing a lot of pretty amazing stuff on LinkedIn. I mean, you're not me, but you're next, pretty much the second, right?
I'm nicer than you.
And then you have the blog, right? So bdfinst.medium.com. where you blog about a lot of pretty amazing stuff. The 5-minute DevOps blog. So that's pretty cool stuff for people that have not seen it yet. So first, I'd like to let you, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about you and your journey, and how you got to be here today.
Well, I mean, I've been a software engineer for a lot of years, and the thing that led me initially along this path was I was put in charge of the merge team for one of our large warehouse management systems at Walmart. Now, and I was put on that team with the task of making the team go away. And that team's job was every quarter we were integrating about 400 branches that lasted for about a quarter back into the build branch, and then dealing with all the conflict resolution so that we could do our quarterly releases of the WMS. And I was told that we needed to make that process go away. So I was working on that, and we were using sort of random branching structure. And I thought, well, what we need more structure on branching. So, if we bring in Git flow, that's definitely the way to go. And then not long after, I was just about to start rolling that out and training everybody on Git flow. And we had a DevOps day where Gene Kim came, and he brought Gary Groover and Damon Edwards. And I heard Gary stand up on stage and talk about trunk-based development. And then I thought that was insane. And then later on, the senior developers from my area, we had one-on-ones with Damon and Gary to talk about what we were trying to do about strangling the WMS. Well, actually re-architecting it for faster delivery. And I confronted Gary about this whole trunk-based development thing and how insane it was. And he pointed me to the success that he had at HP LaserJet and explained to me that I was wrong, and that I should probably look into it a little bit more. And that kind of changed, that conversation changed the direction of where I was going in my career. And I tell Gary and I are friends now, and I tell him that I always buy his beer.
You owe him your entire future after that, so that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit after that.
Well, I mean, so, after that, we started piloting CD, and we, in our area, we were working on, we had a small core team of senior engineers trying to figure out this problem. We were told that we needed to take those quarterly releases we were doing and do it every 2 weeks. And we started kind of, one of the guys bought a copy of Continuous Delivery from, Joe Sumble and Dave Farley. We were digging into that, coming up with some ideas about how we can implement this stuff. And we actually got together and said, no, I mean, every 2 weeks is ridiculous. We should go for daily. And we'll just solve that problem. And we actually had a project manager assigned to this project we were doing to, guide us along the path. And he rage quit when we said we weren't going to go for 2 weeks. So they wanted every 2 weeks. Like, no, that's not a good goal. And so he left. We're like, okay, well, we can manage ourselves. So that's fine. And then we started rolling out, putting together the automation and talking about the practices teams should try to use to get it done. And we couldn't get any traction on the teams because we were just talking at the teams. And nobody had actually done it yet. And there was a lot of problems to solve that we didn't know we had to solve because nobody had actually done it yet. And so I said, just please put me back on a team instead of having this central core group of senior engineers. Just put me back on a team and let's just try to solve this problem. And we started with, I posted the rules for continuous integration, which is every developer has working deployable code on the trunk at least once a day, and then just posted those rules and said, okay, now why can't we do that? And we just started hammering at that problem every single day. And the thing I was proudest about was we didn't have a special team that was created to try this. It was just one of the product teams in logistics. Average team. We had good developers. We had not good developers. I mean, it's just average team, right? But we all pulled together to try to solve this problem. And we went from not delivering much at all to learning how to break down work correctly, work as a team correctly, to start testing, but get pretty decent at testing. And about a little over a year later, we were going to production multiple times a day. And the thing that really spoke to me, though, was that the team's morale was so much higher because we actually got to see our work happening and we had confidence what we were delivering. And since then, that's why I've been pushing this stuff, is just because it makes it better for the customer, makes it better for the organization, but most importantly, it builds and grows high performing, high morale teams out of just your normal team. The engineers you need are the engineers you have. They just need better tools and better ways of working as a team.
Yeah, no doubt. So how did you end up scaling this beside the team, the single first team, I guess?
Yeah, so we were rolling this out, and sharing those messages inside logistics for the rest of the team's logistics. And I was afraid that if we didn't move it outside logistics, that it would just die. And I didn't want to give this up. So I was running around as kind of a hobby, talking about things we were doing to help improve delivery. I was teaching people how to do behavior-driven development. I was talking about testing better. I was doing all this, just giving internal presentations about this is what we should do, and trying to grow the infection. And then in 2017, I had the honor of Jason Van Zyl recruited me to, he was building a global platform for Walmart with the goal of using that platform to incentivize continuous delivery. It was an opinionated platform that would make CD easy and make other workflows not impossible. That was the goal, and create a good developer experience around CD. And he brought me up there first to be the product owner of the metrics platform we're using for delivery metrics, and later to start the dojo to share the experiences we had on the ground with the rest of the teams in Walmart and help them get to CD.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. The kind of scale you're talking about. Right before you ended up being convinced to leave for make a difference here in the department. So, kind of give us a little bit of insight as to what made you make that decision.
It was a few things. I've been at Walmart for a long time, and there's pluses and minuses to being in an organization for a long time. I mean, the plus side is that you have a network. You know who the people are. I developed relationships over the years with different VPs to try to help things out. We built a community for the grassroots to get everyone aligned. This is what we're trying to do, and try to spread that. But if you're in an organization for a long time, they can kind of get used to you, and you're a lot smarter outside your organization in many cases than you are inside your organization. I went to Verizon to go visit their dojo, and I was joking with them that we needed to open source consulting and just expert as a service. We just call each other, just consult for each other, because I'm smarter at Verizon than I am at Walmart, and vice versa. But so I mean, that was part of it, but not really the big thing. You called and talked about the problems in the Air Force and DoD, and I'd had people call me in the past. Recruiters call me, and the first question I always asked them was, "Do you have a bigger problem than I have?" And you were the first person who had a bigger problem than I had.
And we had a pretty big problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that excites me. I mean, that's the thing, is that honestly, I'm a fighter. I don't give up easy. I'm incredibly stubborn. I like to push to make things better, and I just don't give up. And having a bigger problem is exciting.
Yeah, you can't really do bigger than this. So I don't know what you're gonna do next, but I think you're stuck here for a while.
No, and there's lots of us out there in the industry who are going around trying to make things better. And there's a lot of dysfunction in the industry. It's amazing. People go to conferences, they see all these companies talking about how well they're doing. Well, they're doing that well on stage. If you go behind the scenes, there's a lot of things in the industry you can make better. And if we can help show it in the DoD, then that helps.
Good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we can do it in DoD, I remember when I did the keynote at KubeCon, and we put Kubernetes on F-16 jets. I had so many people come after and say, "Hey, if I'm going to use your use case to tell people if we can do it on jets, we can probably do it on cars." And financial industry stuff, and that was a good enabler for people to keep pushing, right? So, tell us a little bit about your role and your focus now that you on the dock side, helping the taxpayer be more efficient and the warfighter be able to do their jobs.
Well, I've been using a name for my role since before I left Walmart that Mick Kirsten I saw talk about the first time, which is value stream architect, which is really coming in and looking at what it takes to remove constraints in the flow. And I have kind of a unique perspective on it, which is you have to be, really broad and be able to look at the organizational level changes, but also be able to get down to the weeds about how do we improve test efficiency and everything in between. So it's a very technical and organizational sort of role in my mind. But that's what I'm doing at Platform One is, number one, I'm building a delivery metrics dashboard similar to what we were using in the dojo at Walmart that not only just shows graphs, that's boring, but it's the purpose of that is to turn the data into action that teams can look at and go, oh, okay, we can fix this next. We can look at these things. It's sort of a self-training aid to help scale the thought process behind how do we do CD with data-driven improvement suggestions, right? But that's just step one. You have to have observability. I was tell people that having delivery metrics observability was the second product we released in the CD platform at Walmart because it's so important. Once you have that observability, it's helping people find ways to improve the flow of delivery and whatever they're doing. And it's a lot more than just delivery metrics, though, because it's also those things roll up to things like OKRs, and OKRs have to roll up to, do we have a common mission? Does everybody know what the mission is that we're on? And are we organized correctly? Are we building the right things? Are we stopping building things that we shouldn't build? So there's a lot to it, but it's basically metrics-driven organizational improvement.
Yeah, that's interesting. So obviously the fanciness of a beautiful dashboard is always great. We had a lot of conversations, you and I, when you started and I was still in a job about the right metrics, right? You look at tracking work, we were struggling. We grew very fast at Platform One from like 10 people to 275 in 6 months. So obviously a lot of growth pain, right? And I felt like, unfortunately, 20% of the people were doing 80% of the work. It was a very challenging thing for me to fix because we're paying, these contractors, right, quite a bit of money, and they're not cheap for the taxpayer. And I feel like, as a government person, I had to make sure we're not wasting the taxpayer money as if it was my money, the same way I would manage my companies, right? And it's difficult, right, to find, okay, how do you create the right metrics without creating the bad behavior, but also at the same time tracking who is doing what and when and how? And how do you know when it's time to maybe consider replacing someone from the team and just give a chance to somebody else? So how do you think about that problem?
Well, I think of it from the point of view of, number one, I'm not Pollyanna. I know that not everybody is here to change the world, right?
Some of them are just not good. That's not, they have
the
right intention.
And again, if you go back to that first experience that I had, how do we, because I've always worked on development teams, and there's always been people on the team that, well, I'm not going to say always because I've been fortunate the last several years, but early on, there's always been somebody that's like, we're dragging, we're bringing them along, but they're not really contributing. And that's true on a lot of teams. But the fact of the matter is that there's also the other problem where you have high performers who are acting on their own, and that's also a big problem because
it doesn't integrate, right?
Yeah, and it's a failure of teamwork. And so if you've got people who are heroes, that's as big of a problem as you have if you have people who are just not contributing at all. Because both of those bring down the team's productivity, and so those are things that you can't really measure those with metrics. You have to, you can look at how many hours people are working. If you got a team where you've got someone working 15 hours a day, then you need to ask them, why is it that you're working 15 hours a day? Why aren't you helping the team help you, you know. But those are things that data numbers don't tell you that. You have to go into the team and observe. You have to go to the Gemba, find out what's dysfunctional in the team, and then help the team grow. And you don't reward heroes, you reward teamwork. How do we improve the flow of delivery in the team? Well, number one, people don't scale. If you have somebody who's a really high performer, has a lot of knowledge, their job is to spread the knowledge. If you read the Phoenix Project, don't be Brent. If you have a Brent, take away their keyboard. I literally had a guy named Brent on my team, and he was one of those high performers, and he felt like he had to do everything. And I pushed him to go and educate everybody else on the stuff that he was driving instead of just driving it, because it made the team better.
So you know Jeff McCoy pretty well. For me, he was obviously one of the top performers of Platform One when he was full-time on Platform One.
Yeah.
He would be kind of a Brent, right? How do you go and explain that to someone like that? And for me, we couldn't do without Jeff. In fact, I argue when Jeff had to work on other things, there was a tremendous loss of value and productivity, and we saw mistakes being made. And so how could we have done better at making sure that Jeff wasn't as important as he ended up being?
Yeah, because it makes the organization brittle, doesn't it?
Yeah,
very brittle. And that's we talk a lot about building resilient applications, but resilient applications are built by resilient teams and resilient organizations, and so you need to architect a team to be resilient. And you can't have a situation like that where you have one person who has so much knowledge, and if they leave, it's a huge problem because it puts the organization at risk. There was one of my favorite podcasts is Soft Skills Engineering Podcast. And they had a comment one day that the role of that we don't scale. Senior engineers don't scale. The only way that we scale is by cloning ourselves. So our job is to grow more senior engineers, not to go do the work directly. And what we could have done, what would I suggest for a situation like Jeff's is you make him lead architect who's guiding people towards doing those things instead of doing those things himself. Teach them.
It's interesting in the use case of Jeff, right? Because Jeff, like me, I guess, is not too much of a people person. He actually likes to get his hands dirty in code.
Sure.
He doesn't like to talk about it, right? And maybe even like me, I guess he thinks, or we thinks we're special and we're smarter than others.
But see, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Right.
We can't accomplish the mission if we don't learn to be people person.
Yeah. Don't you think the best engineers are not always people person, though?
It's a learned skill. And I can tell you that for a fact, because in 2014, I was old school tech lead. Do what I say. We're going to do it my way. I was not a people person. I learned that if we needed to improve the flow of delivery, I had to learn the skill of being a people person. It is not my natural talent. I'm not as massive an introvert as my wife is, but I'm a pretty big introvert. And I would rather be in the coding than trying to make things happen. But things go faster when I'm not doing that. That I am actually wasting time and money if I'm spending most of my time coding.
Right.
And so for the purpose of the mission, which is the most important thing, what's our mission? Not my personal preference. What's the mission? And so I need to do the things that drive the mission forward, irrespective of what makes me happy. Because ultimately, delivering the mission makes me happier than spending time coding.
Interesting.
But it is a learned skill. It is not a talent. I
think some people don't agree that you are not a people person.
But again, it's a learned skill, right? If you'd met me, 8 years ago, I was not a people person.
Interesting. What if you don't learn? What if you can't? I don't know if I can learn it. Do you think I can learn it?
Anybody can learn it. You just have to have it. Just again, for me, it's all about the mission, right? What do I have to do to accomplish the mission, and I'll do that thing.
Interesting. And so, what if an engineer just doesn't want to talk to people, manage people, oversee or even train people, right? Some people are not good trainers, and they are terrific engineers. What do you do with those?
I believe that you can always find a way to leverage people's talents, but again, it comes down to what's best for the team. If we have one of those people on the team and they are a terrific engineer, but they're a silo of knowledge that the team needs, and it puts the team at risk if they get hit by a bus, then we have to extract that knowledge one way or another. We have to remove that silo, right? And so you have to push them to grow, to help other people on the team, because they fail if the team fails, and they are helping the team fail if they're just a silo of knowledge and not spreading the mission.
So at least I know there's at least one person that agrees that I don't have people skills, so that's good. So now, looking at your time now, you've been. When did you join now platform? How long has it been?
I joined the last week of March last year.
So almost a year.
Yeah, coming up on a year.
So what are you listening? And I want to keep a section of this on you being able to send a message to some of the Air Force leadership on what you've seen that has to change, including at Platform One and outside of Platform One. But let's start with what have you thought so far, and when you look at what you accomplished and what's going on in the world, how are we doing, and what can we improve?
I think there's a couple things off the top of my head. One is I've come to realize that Platform One was started in kind of the worst possible place. And let me explain. If you're a startup, you're going to have a seed money and runway to go and execute a strategy. Right? If you are an enterprise solution, you're going to have enterprise money to go and execute the enterprise strategy. And so, for example, the Walmart platform, when we started with one common use case, and then started growing off that use case. We didn't go after just random everything, right? We just we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna expand it to this, and then we'll keep growing and growing and growing until we can take that platform and deploy to 90% of the problems that Walmart needs to deploy to. In Platform One, from what I'm understanding anyway, and I'm sure you'll feel free to correct me, is they never got to be able to be strategic. It was all tactical. We need to solve this customer and this customer and this customer, but not focused on common use cases. It was just being reactionary to chase the money early on.
Yeah, and I think it was the money. The money forced a lot of that, because it was you were an enterprise service without being enterprise funded.
Right.
And all the impediments of enterprise and all the impediments of not getting the funding.
Yeah, without the money to have a strategy, then you're tactical, and it's very difficult to execute a strategy if you're only tactical. And so, getting Platform One reoriented around what's our strategy, right? What's our North Star? What's our mission that we're on? Is everybody aligned to that mission? And how do we better execute that strategy instead of just being tactical, right? There was another one. Hang on, it was off the top of my head, and I didn't write it down. So, yeah, we'll have to come back to that, because I was talking about that. I lost the.
Well, that's fine. So tell us a little bit about what. So you've seen, of course, the impediment and the kind of the growth and the issue with P1, the funding, the massive growth of talent and limitation acquisition to be able to staff it.
Sorry. I remember what the second thing was, right? Is that customer focus.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody building a platform in the DoD needs to understand that the platform's job is not police. Okay? Now, platform's job, in my mind, is to codify the security and compliance required in the pipeline in a way so that developers are safe, while developers have an experience from the platform that makes it super easy for them to deliver quality. Because if they're fighting the platform all the time, then they're focusing on that instead of delivering what they need to deliver. And if you're building platforms, you don't have a platform that's focused on developer experience and focused on how do I make your life better as a developer, then you're not doing your job and you're impacting all those programs. I talked to a developer in Platform at ExxonMobil several years ago, and he said, I've noticed all the top developers come to Platform so they can be closer to the customer. Right? It's a persona we should understand. I consider working in Platform to be an honor. It's the best privileged job a developer can have because they know the persona and they get to make other developers' lives better so that when they leave Platform, they're working someplace where it doesn't suck. Right? And so I think from the DoD, if we're building platforms to help other people, we need to learn how to be customer focused.
So, and of course, people argue they don't always understand who the actual customer is. Some people for Platform One would say, obviously the DoD programs, but then you have the warfighter at the end of it, and the taxpayer, right?
So we have a few customers, right? Our primary customer is the developers doing the work. We don't, if you're in Platform, you're not deploying things to help the warfighter. You're helping people help the warfighter, and it's a super critical mission. You're the infrastructure. All right. Nick went away. You still there, Nick?
I'm here.
The other customer is that we, like I said, we need security and compliance baked into the platform. And I was at a meeting last week where we were talking about the authority to operate and how you get a 3-year authority to operate after you pass through all the gates. And so I wrote on a post-it that's a 3-year license to be insecure because you get an authority to operate and the next push may or may not be compliant. So if you don't have compliance and security baked into the pipelines, it's all fantasy. It's all security and compliance theater. So Platform's job is to figure out how do we turn these rules into things that we can add as quality gates in the flow. And so that we can meet those customers as well. So you've got the enterprise customer, which is in this case is, the DoD saying that we are helping teams be more secure, more compliant. While also you have the customer over here that's the developer saying, we're trying to make your job as easy as we possibly can. And balancing those two concerns is what Platform is for.
Absolutely. Of course, you see another bug today where for some reason the comments are not showing up on the screen anymore. So I have to go on LinkedIn to see what people say. For some reason, it's not showing up on this app anymore. So see, probably someone made an update today and they messed up the feed. I don't know. So how do you prevent that kind of stuff? People argue in DoD we're building weapons. We can't fail, right? So defining failing, of course, failing incrementally and small, so you're not breaking. You're not going to launch a nuclear weapon or something crazy, right? So how do you deal with that kind of fear, right? And I know you've been upset like me when it comes to cyber double standards and different things. So tell us a little bit about what you've seen in a year when it comes to kind of the fear of failing, the cyber nonsense, and the any impediments that's getting in the way of delivery.
Yeah, and I really think in some cases it's not cyber nonsense. I mean, there's a lot of things that at the 50,000 foot level, this is the right thing to do. It's getting into how do we collaborate around making it effective security, right? So if I say something is broken, it's not just, yep, it's broken. That's okay. Well, that's a defect on how we're doing security. We need to fix security, right? And I think that's just an ongoing process of getting people comfortable with the fact that computers can do security better than you can. But we need to have the right rules. We need to keep tuning the rules because every process has defects. And so we have to have a feedback loop to address those defects. The other thing is that not everything is a nuke, right? You need various levels of rigor when it comes to security and compliance based on what you're doing. And how do you establish those rules in a cookie cutter way? I learned last week that basically every ATO is a bespoke thing, that there's not really there's not a repeatable process, which means it costs so much money, so much time.
Oh yeah, it's probably the biggest expense in the Department of Defense.
Yeah, and on top of that, it's fantasy when you're talking about software and saying we're going to use this ATO process for software, because the whole idea behind that is we're building something that will never change. It's completely immutable. We're going to get an ATO for it and deploy it, and then we're done. And that hasn't been true in 20 years or more. I mean, that wasn't true with the Apollo program. They were pushing changes to the Apollo in flight, manually, but in flight, to address issues while they're flying. And they didn't get an ATO for that. They just pushed a change, right? And
Yeah.
the software is always changing, and you can't apply one and done processes to a constantly moving target. You have to have a constantly continuous validation that we're secure and compliant.
Yeah. And so, obviously the ATO process is challenging and effectively not automated at all, which leads to people, having to come up with their own process. And every AO has its own process. Authorizing official has its own process, which leads to then people not being okay with reusing evidence or reusing or having some type of reciprocity with the ATO. So that's just compounds the problem. The same piece of software being assessed dozens of times, making it harder for companies to want to do business with the department. Everybody, agrees there's a difference in mission, but really, is there a difference in the way you would assess software? I mean, maybe you would do deeper dives if you're going to use it on the nuclear side than on a public distro website. But
Well,
have you
and on top
balanced?
of that, I was I've heard of very expensive, very apparently high tech programs that exist in the DoD, where you don't even have things as simple as hardware emulators. So if I'm going to write software that's going to deploy to a fighter, and the only way I can get feedback on to whether this is correct or not is to actually deploy it to a fighter, then of course fear is going to make us go, oh well, we need to do a whole bunch of all this manual validation or things at the end to make sure. No. Why don't we have access in the pipelines to emulators for things like fighter systems? They give us that rapid feedback, because that's what continuous delivery is about. It's not necessarily going to production every minute, but it's about getting feedback on every commit. That
Right.
as far as we know, that we have architected a delivery process whose job is to tell us no, that can't go, that will break stuff. And we're not even building the right emulators. I was talking to a guy in the Navy. He was like, "Yeah, we have to wait for a ship to show up." I mean, it's why are we not investing in the things that allow us to go fast instead of investing in costly process that are fantasy?
Yeah, what you're gonna see more and more now, adoption of digital twinning, as they call it. Modeling and simulation, which obviously the maturity is so important. The more you can have a real replica of what's going on in the real world, the more you can do what you're talking about. And
Right.
the reason why SpaceX is able to release software the day before the launch and do 17,000 build of software a day and three testing the loop, hardware testing the loop testing every day is because of their maturity in digital twin. They have a full hardware in the loop process in their pipeline. We're so
100%.
far away from that on most programs, but it's still the goal. It's
Well, it's because
legacy programming stuff, right?
we're incentivizing the wrong behaviors, right? It's so we're going to save $100 million over here so we can spend $300 million over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This ties directly into metrics too, because that tells us whether or not we're getting the feedback loops we want. I mean, in that original team we had in logistics, we had Slack communication to beta users in the distribution centers, and they make suggestions for features. And then like a day or two later, we deliver the feature and say, is this what you meant? And we get instant feedback. And that feedback loop meant that we're able to iterate rapidly towards what they actually needed instead of what was asked for.
Right. Interesting.
And that was mission critical too. I mean, it's not a nuke, But we're talking about people doing, not only supplying stores, but, if we screwed up, those people didn't get bonuses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big deal. You're impacting people's lives, their ability
Yeah.
to feed their families.
Yeah. So I guess when you started working on the metrics stuff for P1, those fancy dashboards, what kind of metrics do you feel like are a must for any organization to track? And then what's the maturity, right, in terms of tracking? I know you had to do some integration with products like, GitLab and Jira and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, like, what are the top metrics you care about right now?
So the thing that I'm most focused on is, and I break it down into efficiency, effectiveness, and sustainability. Okay. It's really important that we're efficient, and we can measure how efficient we are by doing things like what's the lead time? What's the cycle time from started to done for a piece of work, right? That cycle time gives us a lot of insights to, how much uncertainty we had when we started. And Paul Hammond, who's an awesome guy, he maintains trunkbaseddevelopment.com, and he's a big proponent of this. He has a blog post he posted in 2012 that says that basically, if you can't finish a user story, and that's a vertical sliced user story, right? If you can't finish it in a day, you don't have the right people, the right technology, or the right information. And driving down that batch size is what gets you clarity and quality. Also, continuous integration behavior. How frequently are we integrating code? Are we working as a team well? Can we process? Do we understand what it is we're coding? And are we delivering things that are tested? And then, of course, you have to have guardrail metrics for these, because if we're focusing just on shrinking batch size, but we're not focusing on the outcomes of those small batches, are they breaking? One of the things that gives me heartburn is when people measure quality with code coverage. That gives me huge amounts of heartburn, because that doesn't tell us anything. I actually have a NIST document that tells you it doesn't tell you anything. I'm happy to share it with anybody. It's being misread a lot by the DoD to mean that we have to have 80% code coverage, but two sentences after it says 80% is an example of a code coverage metric, it says that high code coverage doesn't tell you have quality. The measure of quality is defect rates. Are people opening issues against the application? I honestly don't even care if they're P1, P2, whatever. Just the number of defects being created tells us whether or not, either we're implementing incorrectly, not testing well, or maybe even the requirements are wrong, which is also a defect. And how do we fix our process? So those three things working together are going to be leading indicators for lots of things. The next level up from that's going to be DORA metrics, and and I'm writing a paper right now for IT Revolution on DORA metrics and the problems that we're seeing in the industry, because people are creating DORA dashboards, thinking that they're silver bullets, and teams are just gaming the dashboards, and they're being beat up with DORA metrics, and they're using them for maturity model, basically, instead of health indicators for the flow of delivery, which is, the actual metrics they use in the book, and I go into this detail in the paper, were based off of getting survey information to make correlations between, batch size, throughput, and quality to organizational performance. But not all of those metrics are good metrics to measure if that's what you're trying to do. For example, change fail rate. People mismeasure that all the time. They keep thinking it's just we had an incident after a change. But of course, if you read the book, it's any defect that occurs after a change. But then why wouldn't we just measure defect rates instead of trying to tie a defect to a specific change? Because tying a defect to a specific change doesn't add any value. We're trying to improve the entire quality process on that flow, not why did this change have a defect. And so defect rate is going to be better if you're actually trying to measure that sort of thing. And I mean, that's just an example, but the fact that people are using them as goals destroys the metric. I've seen all sorts of different anti-patterns. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday at a large organization that he's recently joined about their DORA dashboard, and they have a DORA dashboard that they built in-house. And teams use it as this we're good or bad based on the door dashboard, and so they'll do things like just push comments to improve their deploy frequency, right? And that doesn't add any value to anybody. And I've talked to a lot of vendors over the last year about dashboards they're building, and trying to help them with the mindset of what is this for? The dashboard we're building in Platform One, it doesn't just show data. It has graphs relative to other graphs with information leading to, good practices about how to make these things better, and tips and tricks, and, how do we help people get better, and what should you look at if you're having this sort of issue, right? So it's a training aid and to help the team self-improve. But as soon as you use it as a stick, it's worthless. But then, so we've talked about, but that's efficiency, right? But it doesn't matter if we're efficient if we're not delivering the right thing. So number one, is it quality? Are we getting defect rates? Is it useful to the end user? Just because we're delivering quickly doesn't mean it's useful to the end user, right? And so we need to have feedback from the user about whether that's what they actually wanted or not, because the entire purpose of being able to deliver rapidly is to get better at that. Because the reality of software development is the requirements are wrong, or we've misunderstood them, or they'll change before we deliver. And so getting small batches out rapidly to get feedback is the most important thing, not the small batches. So how do we get rapid feedback from small batches to change?
Yeah, so two questions there, right? One is, how do you end up effectively automating to some degree that feedback loop, right, with the end user? Because if you're delivering small incremental capabilities, the user might not even realize there's a new feature because it's so small, it's anecdotal at some point.
No, that's true.
Until maybe it becomes something bigger, right? So there's that piece there. And then the second piece is, with DoD, a lot of the metrics you mentioned have to track the actual delivery of defects or actual production state of the system. But a lot of people are going to argue, that would be classified, or you would have a tough time bringing it back, that information back to the development environment. Have we figured out how to do that yet? Or do you know, when I was working it was very difficult to convince people to let production data, awareness of what's running, what's not running, crashes, defects, bugs, flow back to the developers for them to be aware.
Yes, on the first thing, as far as small batches that the user might not notice, that we're still getting feedback we didn't break anything. This has been an argument I've had for years. People say, well, we're not, until it's feature complete, there's no point in delivering it. I'm like, well, no, because we validated we didn't break anything with this next change.
Right.
Ultimately,
but you don't know if they like it.
Do what?
But you don't know if they like it yet.
No, you won't know you like it until you can get them to a visible change, which means that our highest priority is the portion of the change that gets us the user feedback that we can build on, and not just, you don't build sequentially, you build inside out, right? What's the highest priority thing that we want feedback on? That's what we need to deliver first, and then start growing from there, right?
So how do you get that feedback? Are you tracking any open source libraries or something that's enabling like some telemetry, like thumbs up buttons or something next to features that pop up on the screen for the user to say, hey, I like it? Or how do we get this feedback back? You're not going to talk to all these people, right?
Honestly, it very much depends what you're delivering. We talked about using like NPS scores or thumbs up, thumbs down to get feedback from platform customers at Walmart. And I said, if platform's doing its job, you don't even know it's there. And as soon as you inject something into getting me feedback, you've interrupted my workflow, and I hate you.
Yeah.
But it just depends. It's going to be very, very specific to whatever application you're building. Talk to someone who's into UX. How can we most effectively get user feedback for this thing? If you're dealing with platform, the best way to get user feedback is directly from the users who are complaining. You're not going to get, this is awesome from anybody, but you're going to get complaints. So you need to take them seriously and come up with a way to rapidly address them and feed them into your backlog.
So is it like the rate of complaints? You say you're tracking the volume of complaints, and in proportion to the number of customers, because people always complain for sometimes the wrong reasons. Not everybody is right.
No. Well, and some complaints are invalid. We had people at Walmart pushing us like, well, I want it to be easier to do Git flow. I'm like, nope. We'll teach you how to do trunk-based development, and we're happy to teach you do that, but we're not going to make it easier to do Git flow. Sorry. And because not all complaints are valid, but you need to look at them and assume they're valid until they're not, and not work as just assume everybody's an idiot. I think that's pretty important. You need to assume best intentions for your customers and that they actually might not be idiots. But then if you have something like a web app or something that you want to know if it's what they needed, it just depends on the app and what makes it so you can get feedback in a way that's not intrusive enough so that it starts skewing the feedback results. Because if you bombard me with feedback requests, I'll get you poor feedback on asking me about feedback.
Yeah, that's why the more you're intrusive, the more of a problem it's going to be to get real viable data, right?
Right.
So I guess we talked about the first part of the question, but what about that feedback loop of getting data that would be like classified or would be seen as sensitive?
So number one, operational data is absolutely required. And I would think that the higher the sensitivity, the more required operational data is. It's more important to know this thing is functioning correctly.
Right.
Right. So you have to solve that problem. Does that mean that you have people with top secret clearance acting as SRE? Does that mean that that the developers have the clearance to go and look at production logs, right? Do you have people whose only job it is to make sure that the logs only contain the barest amount of information for operational stability that don't leak any secure information? It's an engineer.
Yeah, I would argue a lot of that data should not be classified, but ends up classified because it's aggregated into volumes that leads it to be classified.
And we have to solve the right problem. The right problem is not we need to make sure all the information is secure. The right problem is we need operational stability in a way where it keeps the information secure. But operational stability is the higher priority, because if it's secure and doesn't work, who cares?
Right. We do a lot of that. I had talked a lot with NSA to convince them to let us bring some data back, and they had agreed, for example, for containers, to let us know like which tag of a container is running, if it's crashed and what the error code of the crash. But basic telemetry, right?
Well, it's just like dealing with HIPAA or PCI, right? I mean, what's the minimum set of data required to do what you need to do, right? But ultimately, you can't be in a situation where I'm delivering something, I have operational responsibility for it, and I have no idea if it's running or not until someone calls me. Because how does that help the end user? Right? And, that comes back to sustainability, because I talked about efficiency and effectiveness. With sustainability, there's two parts to that. Do we have a resilient application out there that people can depend on? It's available, stable, secure, right? Useful. But then also, are our teams getting burned out? Do we have people working 15-hour days? Because again, resilient applications are built by resilient teams. And if you have a team that's happy, that's focused, they understand the mission they're on, they're all committed to that mission, right? They're going to deliver better results than a team that's constantly under stress or doesn't understand what their mission is. They're just treated like script kiddie code monkeys that are just thrown tasks to do.
Yeah, and it's true that the mission is so exciting. I found that when I left the department, it's pretty difficult to be excited about something else after this, right? It's like you're playing in the top professional soccer or baseball or basketball team, and now you're with a kindergarten team coming out of the department, because the mission and the impact on our kids, and that's what I talked to you a lot about before you join, is why I did it.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that resonated with you when we talked about the features.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I have a personal mission to make every developer's life better. which means that we all get to work on the teams that I like to work on, which is a mission-focused, high-performing team where that's high morale. Everybody's plays well together, right? And we actually get to deliver stuff. I think, the hardest part of this is the people, right? And that's why you have to become a people person if you want to make anything better, because the people's the hardest problem. My friend Scott Nasello, he's currently at eBay. When I met him, he told us that what we're trying to do is hack the biggest undocumented API, that we should have gone to psychology school and civil engineering programs. And that's true. It's like, how do we get people on board with what we're trying to get done, and to convince them this is real stuff? And in some cases, we've got problems where people just lack the imagination of what's possible because they've never seen it. CD's been around. And the book was published in 2010, but as a practice, it's older than that. And people still think it's an edge case, right? But it's just not. It's just that they haven't seen it in practice and seen how it improves quality, improves stability. It's not about we get to deliver features fast and we get to play around as developers. It's we have the discipline to deliver quality things for operational stability. That's what CD is about, right? And explaining to people that, it's an important capability that you're missing. There's a post on Platform One a while back that I wrote that it was talking about Log4j and said, how long will it take you to fix the Log4j thing? And if your answer is anything other than, it took us a day or two, then you're at risk for the next problem, because those problems are out there. We just don't know what they are. And if you don't have the ability to rapidly repair production with your standard process, instead of, creating a dumpster fire by using some sort of workaround to get changes out there, you're at risk. Continuous delivery is a strategic initiative, not some toy for developers to play with.
Yeah, well, you probably cannot compete in 2022 at all and have a chance of success without it. I don't think it's even optional. I mean, it's probably a must.
Yeah, I think the current thing we just need to keep reminding people is that stop claiming you're agile if you can't deliver to production daily. You're just not. It's 2022.
Yeah. So we'll take a few questions, but before that, I have one last on my list, and then we have a lot of questions. And people, if you ask questions before the freeze of LinkedIn comments, beautiful bug, please ask the question again, because they disappeared. So I have a lot, but I still probably want you to post it again. So my last question was about many of the teams in the department, particularly the DoD, and I've seen it a lot in the Navy and unfortunately in the Space Force, are pushing for, very precise, well organized, maybe too organized, one size fits all framework, like SAFe, not to mention it.
Yeah.
And I've seen disasters and tremendous waste of time and taxpayer money for teams that try to do it, particularly when they had no real understanding of Agile, and ended up, effectively being a waterfall program with Agile, SAFe, terminologies, and creating kind of a nightmare of the worst of both, right? So how have you seen SAFe play out, and what are your recommendations for teams that are looking at scaling Agile on a large team and organization, to still have some type of organizational, structure, but still being able to cut the work, and is it a matter of cutting the work right? How do you succeed and do things like SAFe help or not?
So, I could spend another hour and a half talking about the pain I went through during having SAFe inflicted upon me, and also, witnessing other areas have SAFe inflicted upon them. My team at Walmart in the dojo, we called ourselves Safe Crackers because we went to go rescue teams from SAFe, and it's not just SAFe. I'd say it's any scaling framework, because the purpose of frameworks is to scale Agile, usually scaling Scrum, right? And it's scaling process, and it's going along the lines of number one, we're as agile as we can be with our current way we work and our current application architecture and our current organizational architecture. So what we're going to do is we're going to teach people how to do stand-ups better, and we're going to teach them how to story point and to play planning poker. And then we're going to chain people together into release trains and create jobs around these things that have to get done. And that's step one. And I've been having conversations with people recently who are telling me, well, really step 3, though, is that you found SAFe too constraining and you've moved beyond it. I'm like, no, you don't, because you've created jobs that people are being paid to do to keep the status quo, right? So you'll never move beyond it. And you can't patch in, you can't compensate for poor organizational application architecture with process. It just never works. The outcome that I experienced was that it looked like we had a lot more structure, that everything was much more controlled. From a management point of view, I bet you it looked great, but we delivered slower. And it was more painful. And we spent more time in meetings doing stuff that was complete nonsense. PI planning is one of those nonsense meetings. Because in PI planning,
you wouldn't believe the cost of that in the government setting. I've seen.
Oh, I would. I've seen 500 people sitting in PI planning meetings.
I've seen that too.
Right.
Unified Platform in the Air Force was the largest PI planning meeting that I've seen, and that must have cost a lot of money to the taxpayer.
And I watched a PI planning meeting for another area where I saw complete fantasy planning happening, where it's like, oh, this story is going to land on this week of the quarter. And I'm like, if you want to get that many people together and have a fantasy time, just make it a book club or watch Lord of the Rings for 2 days, because at least then it's entertaining fantasy. But this was complete waste. And not only that, when you have things like people being held, I know someone who's every quarter has to meet an 85 percentile committed versus completed, which means that whatever was planned at the beginning of the quarter is the plan, and it can't vary because it changes your completion.
Anti-agile metric, right?
Yeah. And so that's metrics abuse, and means that you're just doing worse than waterfall. It's not even waterfall. It's worse than waterfall, right? It means that if there's an emergency comes in, you're incentivized not to handle the emergency, or not even emergency, just a critical need someone has, right? That you need to wait until the next PI, because otherwise it blows my metrics.
And they freeze releases too.
Yeah. There's just so much bad to it, right? And so people ask, well, what do you do? Okay, well, number one, if you want to change how your organization delivers, your organization is currently delivering the best it can in the current environment. You have to change the environment. You need to re-architect your organization for delivery. You need to find out where the flow of value is for the different product lines in your organization, and organize the teams around minimizing handoffs. Dominica DeGrandis, I saw a presentation she gave a while back. She's the author of Making Work Visible. And I forget who she was referencing, who actually said this, but it was awesome, that every hard dependency that your team has is an exponent on your chances of being late. So you have a 50-50 chance of being late on something. If you have one dependency, it's 50, it's into the power of 2, power of 3, power of 4, right? And so you have to minimize your hard dependencies. You don't want release trains unless every train, well, you want release sports cars. You want people to be completely independent, deploying asynchronously from each other. But what that means is
what DevSecOps and microservices is about too, right?
Well, microservices, I think, get really abused as a silver bullet. I mean, they're a solution for a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And horizontally scaling capacity of the application and horizontally scaling throughput through teams is one of the problems it helps with if you actually first understand domain-driven design. And that was the next thing I was going to go to, is people focus on microservices and they build distributed monoliths that still chain teams together. But if you want to go fast, you need to look at your organization. You need to carve it up into the business domains. You need to keep carving it up until you get to team-size subdomains where this team owns this business capability. And I mean full ownership. They own what the problem is, how it's solved, and the outcomes of their decisions. because the outcomes of the decisions is the back pressure against resume-driven development or stupid ideas, right? It's the back pressure that prevents code coverage instead of testing, right? It's you have to have operational responsibility for the thing you're building, or it's just going to be crap. But then when you break that up into subdomains and then, architect the organization to mirror a good application architecture, then you will get a good application architecture and things will move fast. It takes time to get this done. It is not.
So do you find maybe a lot of the problems we see, at least what I've seen, was the domains were not cut right, they were not understood right. So the whole
overlap dependencies,
overlaps, yeah.
And so people try to monkey patch that with safe, and it just doesn't work.
So really, all we need to do is better domain-driven design training.
Yeah, we need to train. Number one, nobody should ever build a microservice unless they can first demonstrate that they understand how to build a domain diagram that demonstrates that we are loosely coupled from other microservices.
Right.
But
if you start to type a couple microservices, you're creating a bigger nightmare than a monolith.
Yeah, you've added operational complexity without reducing application complexity. So good job. But then also taking it up to strategic domain-driven design, where we're talking about how do we architect teams. We did this in logistics. We didn't say, hey, we're going to do CD. Step one was weeks of us getting together, debating what the subdomains under warehouse management were, what those capabilities were, and then seeing how complex those capabilities were and whether they needed to be split into further subdomains so we could get something that a team could comprehend and support on their own that was loosely coupled from the rest of the application. Right. That was step one, was the deliberate design of the teams that were going to be implementing continuous delivery.
So two things there, right? Is now you still need, to some degree, despite microservices being loosely coupled, ideally, if you did a good job at getting them, you still need, most organizations will say, hey, you still need to have some type of product owner kind of.
You have to have,
right?
You need really strong product ownership, right? And depending on how complex the system is, you might need, another layer above. So every team needs to have a product product ownership as a capability within the team. It could be a product owner. It could just be that the team has strong product ownership as a capability without a specific person. I've seen both happen, right? You need to be aligned on the broader product goals. So if my team's implementing this subcomponent of the product, I don't just get to move independently of the goals of the product. I need to be aligned on the vision we're going towards and aligned to the product roadmap. And then I have my capabilities roadmap that align to the product roadmap, right? And you need that decision making happening. Right. And then, does this product align to the broader organizational goals? And if not, how do we alter it or kill it? Because not all products should be kept just because they exist.
Yeah. So we have a few people actually on the chat right now that have in their, LinkedIn titles, the word safe, probably because they paid for a pretty expensive certification, or they spent a lot of time having to learn that 500-page book nonsense. So what do we tell those people? They clearly, they that's probably wasted money. So how do you move on, and do you keep putting good money after bad money, right?
And I feel for them, because as soon as you spend a lot of money in something, you're very, very invested in it being correct. And it's hard, right? And so,
but their companies made them take it too, right?
Well, and I've talked to people who's had their company made them take it, and they're like, yeah. And then they asked me to re-up next year for $500, and I said it wasn't worth the effort, because I've had, I think last weekend I was having some long conversations on LinkedIn, debating back and forth, and I kept hearing apologists, talking about how there's good things in safe. I'm like, yeah, I know there's good things in safe, and I can point to the original source material they took it from. I just use the original source material.
Also, they made it a bloated thing that's way too opinionated and one size fits all. it's anti-DevSecOps in my opinion. It was pretty decent.
Well, but the scary thing is all the bad things that are in Safe. And again, Safe is the thing I'm most familiar with. I haven't looked at less or in other things, but my opinion is frameworks solve somebody else's problem, and they only solve yours if you have that exact problem. But there's so many bad things that I can point to and say, this will cause destructive outcomes if you do this thing. And if you know the difference between those two things, then you no longer need Safe.
And unfortunately, some duty contracts require it. I wrote a memo highly discouraging the use of Safe in the department, but that didn't stop a lot of teams that were already completely bought in. And honestly, what they were looking for is like this waterfall or like this structure, right, around the reporting and the data and, EVM, as we call it, inventory management, all this stuff where we're supposed to report the spendings and did we get value out of it. And so they kind of built this massive bureaucracy around what used to be Scrum and Agile teams.
Yeah, and again, it just comes down to: do we all know what the mission is? Do we have in team responsibility of the subcomponents of the application? Do we all understand what the application roadmap is? The product roadmap, all aligned to it. All of us are contributing up to that product roadmap, right? I need OKRs. That are OKRs that are real OKRs that are focused on product outcomes and not I took training or something. And we need to make sure that those OKRs are tied to a strong vision of what it is the problem this product is supposed to solve, and who our customers are. But I don't need a whole bunch of heavy process to get that done. I just need people to talk to each other.
Right. So, people that put on their LinkedIn, though, must be still, mentioning it on LinkedIn is one thing, but putting it on the LinkedIn title, right, of their job description, the top line at the top there, clearly they're bought in, right? They believe in it too, right?
Probably. I wouldn't put it up there unless I was bought in that this is the right way to go. A while back, when I first started getting really involved on LinkedIn, I saw these 3-letter certifications, so I added CPD to my name, Certified Pragmatic Developer. I've talked to a lot of people that are Safe certified. It's like, yep, I don't want to. That's not the right direction to go. And I've talked to a lot of people that are Safe certified who tell me that we just implemented it incorrectly. I'm like, well, based on the feedback I get from my other peers in Fortune 100 companies, there must be a crap ton of really crappy Safe
right.
that, maybe Safe needs to improve the quality of their certification process, because all these people,
right, because they're all certified, yeah.
It's and I don't want to offend anybody, but it acts like a religion, right?
Yeah, it is.
And it's not even just it's like Agile. There's a lot of Agile, capital A Agile, that acts like a religion, instead of we are trying to continuously deliver value to the end user, right? Which is a measurable thing. It's like, oh no, you need to do these things. I've had people argue with me that things like definition of ready aren't in the Scrum guide. I'm like, I don't care. It's a useful tool, so I use the useful tool. Here's why it's useful. If it's not in your religious book, then I don't care.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of companies reach out to me to ask for help, and they want my help and my time. And I had a company last week reach out to me that really was putting pretty much everywhere on their website that they were safe certified of whatever dozens of certification things.
Yeah, it's like, oh, cool. We can help you. Take that off your website.
Yeah, I was like, until you take it. My first advice was say, until you take it out of the website, I can't help you. But all right, let's take some questions from the public. I know there's so many questions. So Gerald was asking, let me bring it up here. Was asking, would you still recommend starting with a small team to transform an entire organization over DevSecOps and CI/CD?
Yeah, I think that you need to learn the things you don't know about CD in an organization. And I wouldn't say start on one team, but I would start with a small core. Again, I wouldn't create special teams for that. that are, like high performing, a bunch of high performers for many reasons, but mostly because then people will have an excuse like, well, yeah, but you put this Tiger team together to get it done and they were special, right? I would just, again, first architect what our application needs to look like for it to actually deliver with continuous delivery. Make sure the teams are aligned to that architecture, and then start with a few teams and start with solving the problem of how do we implement continuous integration, and then how do we harden the pipeline so that we can reliably go to production on every push. Right, and that hardening the pipeline also is critical, because the team's primary product and the reason why teams should own their own pipelines and not be centrally owned is that their primary product is the quality gates that prevent bad things from flowing downstream. You should have core things like security and compliance owned by platform, but the quality gates themselves, that for functional quality, performance, all that sort of thing, that's the team's responsibility, and only they know their application well enough to make those good.
But I guess, don't you think now in 2022, with so many teams having successfully moved to DevSecOps to some degree of maturity, but many have done it, don't you think we're past like the trial and error, and at least going all in with dozens of teams might be a better start than just one or two?
I think it depends on honestly the experience that you have inside your organization to help those teams grow. If you're very experienced at it, then you can do a whole bunch of teams at once. If you're not very experienced, you have to first grow the experience of how do I help teams when they struggle.
Right. So they would need to hire or bring someone that has built this before.
Right.
Right.
Yes, but the experience I have is that you can put a lot of good information out there to help teams get it done, but when you need to push them over the edge. That there's a mental block on teams that haven't done this, that they don't actually believe it's true until you just show them a little bit of success, and then they'll run, right? But you have to get them over that hump. And getting over that hump, that's something we worked on at Walmart. Is like, how do we attack this problem? How do we scale this out? And sure, you can do dojo engagements with individual teams and get them past the hump, but it doesn't scale very well. It's important. It helps everybody understand what the organizational problems are, and it helps those teams. And you can point to those teams as success stories, but then you also have to do other things to help the other teams help themselves. And you have to have the knowledge yourself on identifying when there's problems and heading them off, instead of, you can't just throw a dashboard at it and say, look, we're CD.
Right. All right. So let's get to the next question. This is actually an interesting question. I'd love to hear your answer. Why does everyone think open source development is so great?
It's got more eyes on it. So if you look at, there's a thing that is really common, especially in industry, you have SOX, with separation of concerns, which people in software development sometimes mean that somebody else deploys my thing, which is the wrong way. Or at least two developers are looking at the code, which is to try to make sure that, number one, there's no bad actors, but number two, or do we agree this is the right thing to do? If you're working on closed source, there's not as many eyes on it as if it's a big open source project. Now, I'll say that, there's been some work with Stephen McGill and Derek Weeks put out their state of supply chain report. And they talk about, they did an analysis of Maven Central and looked at, projects in Maven Central that were pretty secure, and the behavior on those projects. Not all open source is good. Open source that's heavily used, well maintained, that people keep up to date with security. You need to look at those metrics if you're looking at a big open source project and try to pull it in. But it's going to be better than anything intersource you do, because a lot of people are working on solving that problem, way more than you have in your company. So it's just more eyes on the problem.
Yeah, more transparency, right?
Yeah.
So Michael has another great question. From your experience at Walmart, how do you incentivize program offices to adopt something like Platform One? How do you make it apparent that building the ISC on your own will result in suboptimal outcomes?
Well, number one, you're transparent about operational cost of building your own platform. Number two, you make it better than what they have. the way that we were, I talked a little bit about irresistible developer experience was our North Star. And the way that we were scaling it wasn't, here's the platform, now you must use it. It was, hey, what problems is our platform not solving for you? And how can we solve it for you better than the tool you have now? So that number one, you don't have to pay for your tool. You can just use our stuff for free, but it also makes your job easier. Help us help you.
Did you find teams that were so in love of, you talk about the cult mindset of Safe, but I've seen cult mindset of other tools and other companies in the DevSecOps landscape. Did you find that there was no point, trying to resonate with those people?
Very rarely. Usually people didn't want to deal with their own tools. They were just doing it because they had to, right? We also, there's a little bit of magician's force there, because if you start with, hey, we're going to take over ownership of the licensing cost of your tool. We'll operate it for you, right? And then we're going to help you solve your problems to see if our platform can do it better. And then if you still want to use your tool, you're just going to have to take the budget hit of paying for it again. And no VP wants to give up money, right? But the goal was always make it better than what they have. There was a couple of instances where like, no, we're really invested in this tool, right? And our response was, okay, well, eventually, as long as your tool includes all of the security and compliance controls and conforms to all of the external reporting requirements to feed data to us, then you can use your tool. It's fine.
Right. Did you see some of these teams, kind of not try to move to your enterprise or to your offering because of personal preferences that really was, it's like GitHub versus GitLab, right? So, some people are just in love with one and not the other, and it's just personal opinions. But does it make sense for the enterprise then to bring more options?
No. Really, which the enterprise can't afford to give everybody their personal preference. And from an enterprise point of view, especially when you get to source control, you're not going to give teams the option of just bringing in whatever source control tool you want. That's company assets, right? You have to have control over the company assets, and you can't just let people let's say, well, you know what, I like Bitbucket, so we're going to use Bitbucket. No, that's
what if they have money and they get away with being able to buy it so far? That's kind of, the other mindset also of DoD is you talk about running operations. People are taught in DoD that you should have no dependencies from anybody, and you should really be running your own SLAs operations. So people are very cautious about using enterprise stuff, right?
I'd ask why it is we're not tracking the cost of that. There's cost that comes with freedom, and you need to balance freedom and cost. Why are we not being more responsible with my money? This is the same attitude I had at Walmart. We had an incentive bonus that was based off company performance. And if you were taking money off the bottom line by spending money, you're impacting my bonus. And so when you're making stupid financial decisions, that's my money you're playing with. So why aren't you being more responsible with my money? I take it personally. Well, it's still my money. I know a few billion here, a few billion there, it doesn't really matter to the government, but it kind of does.
Yeah.
How much money are we wasting that could be used for better things like roads, bridges, critical infrastructure that's crumbling while we burn money on stupidity?
Yeah, good point. All right, so David has another question that's also interesting, and I'm not going to put David on the spot because he has a safe thing on the title, so I removed it. See, I'm very nice. This is interesting. Obviously, in our context, there are quite rightly some I-shaped people. I've never been told on the benefit of making them T-shaped. Do you look to get them to work with the teams more, perhaps after the first run of the work? That was when we were talking about the people person and at the beginning of the conversation.
Well, I would wonder why it is we would on purpose build a fragile team, right? Number one, because specialists on a team make the team fragile. Unless your team's just so big that you've got enough coverage of specialists, But then if you're, there's that quote, what is it? Oh crap, I forget the quote. Never mind. But if you have someone whose job is a tester and they don't understand how the development's happening, can they really be an effective tester, for example? Right? They don't really understand how the code's being built because they're not in the code really. That's a completely. It makes management easy, but it doesn't make it for a resilient product to have I-shaped people.
Now, so how do you deal with someone like Elon Musk, right? You have someone like Elon Musk who is, a genius. I mean, I don't think he can be compared with many others. Is critical to the organization. I don't know how much he's trying to spread the vision and stuff across the organizations he's leading. But if we listen to you, I guess to some degree, it's almost like we don't need him. Where I would argue, Tesla and SpaceX and so on would probably not exist without him. If we just say, hey, you're special, but you're an I-shaped guy. How do we deal with that?
There's a difference between saying get rid of them and educating them, right? If you allow people to be a knowledge silo, then that's a management failure.
Right.
It's not a failure of them. It's a management failure. That manager is not making sure that team is long-term sustainable.
Right.
Right. If the entire organization will crumble because somebody left, that's a failure of leadership.
What if, we've seen it in the past, right? I mean, I would argue Apple is not as good as it was during the Jobs days.
I agree. Yeah. They lost vision. I mean, that's different, though, from having a siloed knowledge. That's vision.
So how do you differentiate that, though?
Well, when you're doing something that's unique, you need a visionary to drive it.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's not anybody else who shares that vision to step up, then ultimately the vision will die, right? That's just a cycle of things. But that's different from, we can't deliver on the vision because this person left.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right? Those are two very different things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Okay. So there's a question here from David, and I guess it's for me, but I'm also gonna ask you probably something similar, and I'm gonna answer it first. But so David was asking, what do I think about the main challenges when it comes to digital twins? And he thinks it will take a bit of time to build competence on the software. And look, digital twins is complex because many of the programs have a tremendous technical debt where they built many of the components and the pieces of a weapon, and now they realize, wait, we should have a digital twin, and now they have to build a twin, but they also have to still push for innovation and improve the weapon as it is. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem and catching up and tech debt problem. It's also I'm surprised with the lack of options and new modern software capabilities when it comes to modeling and simulation tools. Many of these tools are very much legacy tools, Windows based, not designed for cloud whatsoever. Very expensive tools, not very nimble, monolithic nightmares. When we had to run some of those on Cloud One and make them available to the enterprise, very difficult to scale the multi-tenancy, tie back to any of the DevSecOps tooling. It's not really designed to go hand in hand with the software side. So the hardware piece is there. It's also a very difficult learning curve for engineers to be able to become really mature. And on top of it, we're dealing with some of the most complex systems where you have to emulate and replicate a lot of the life around us when it comes to other weapons, when it comes to what's going on in the air, at sea, on the ground, a lot of the weather issues and so many things that needs to be able to be represented in the digital twin to see how something would behave. And it's a big lift, and it's probably the hardest lift that exists in any system. Probably the most advanced maturity is required. You could stop, baby steps, but quite honestly, you're not going to really see the real value until you get mature enough to get something tangible. And in the meantime, you kind of spending a lot of money and a lot of time, and you can't really demonstrate some of the return on investment yet for a pretty good bit of time, because it does require to have some of the foundation of digital twin to be able to start trusting the twin. So it's kind of a vicious cycle to some degree, kind of almost like strangling a piece of software back to modern software best practices. It's kind of the same thing you have to do on the hardware side as well, and the decoupling of hardware with the software, and the cutting of the hardware monolithic context into maybe modules and sensors and things that can be replaced and be more modular. So it's a massive.
The thing I think one of the big challenges is there's the habit of done, that we'll give it to you when it's done, right? I need to be able to have an environment that I can treat like cattle and not like a pet. And I definitely don't want it to be the production being the only environment that's real. So I need a production-like environment. So what's step number one? How do we get closer to that? And then how do we get closer to that every single day, right? Start. Don't wait to be done. Just start, and you'll start seeing more and more improvement as you go, as you get a more competent digital twin of the production environment. But people tend to want to wait until it's done before they do anything, which means perfect never ships. They'll never see it. And instead, we'll just keep putting people at risk, because the first time we test anything is months after it's built.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't think we have a choice. I don't think you can move at a pace of relevance, particularly with a weapon, when you care about resiliency and high availability and making sure you're not creating a disaster, to deal without digital twin. It's a must. It's not a nice to have. So
yeah, I mean, it's like going back to the days when I couldn't test anything in a distribution center until the test lab was free. Versus we had a VM we could spin up that mirrored production. We could run a test in and then destroy the VM.
Right. Another question from Jason here, Jay. What special additional considerations would you suggest when implementing CI/CD pipeline for delivering trained machine learning models, MLOps, versus traditional software applications?
All right, so I'm going to just straight up say that I have no personal experience in machine learning, but the principles apply. What's the definition of production worthy for that model? Then we need to put gates in the pipeline that validate that definition of production worthy for that model. So if you go to minimumcd.org, we've laid out the practices that should apply to any context. And I would challenge anybody, it's a positive challenge, if they have a context where they don't think those practices apply, to open a defect against minimumcd.org. But if you're doing machine learning through the pipeline, what's the definition of ready to go to production for that model, and then test for it.
I think the challenge I find in ML, particularly in the DoD setting, is if you train that model with biased data, but data that was biased on purpose, it's very difficult to prove or to understand, right? Your test may be able to pick it up, but to most degrees you won't. And so if there was malicious data, or just like partisan data on a political side, or anything like, it's very difficult to track.
Yeah, and I agree. And the only test for a test is prod.
Right.
And you can never be in a situation where the pipeline you're done hardening the pipeline. So you deploy to prod, you find out that the data you used was biased. And so then you inject a quality gate to try to prevent that in the future.
Yeah, I'm just worried that in some degree it will be very difficult to even find out.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Get away unnoticed for years before someone is like, wait a minute, the data we used to train had a filter on something that led it to become biased, and we thought the results were good, but they're not good.
Yeah, but that's not really a CD problem, right?
No,
that's
it's
a
not.
design problem.
Yeah, but I guess it's just for me, when I think MLOps, is how do I validate that a model is ready and trusted for production, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of the gates, right, I've yet to see any product that does any kind of a good job at looking at the data, the source of data, and was that data filtered? I have a use case I'm thinking about with Facebook that actually managed to train their models with specific data that came from their systems, but they had an employee kind of know that, hey, if I pick this kind of people, they're more likely to be Democrats, and and then they can filter the data so that the model is then trained to push content that Democrats are going to like, right? And kind of allegedly, push people towards one side or the other. That's just because the filter of the data initially was done by picking like books that the people liked, that we knew the books were more like books read by Democrats and Republicans, and that led to biased models. But if you look at the data, you would just see, hey, a bunch of books and stuff. You would never know, hey, those books are liked by Democrats. It's just how do you find out that the reasoning of the filtering of the data that took place before it got to that team building the model, because it was a different team building the giving the data to that team building the model, was already biased by the time it got there. So it's a whole set of like nightmares. We're not even remotely prepared for this kind of stuff. I think so. That's just interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how you build a quality gate for that.
Yeah. It's and you would have to know where stuff came from, and how did that filtering of the initial data subset, because they had to filter down, right, a subset of data first, and that very first filter was biased, right? So anyway, another question from Razi: how important is business architecture when considering CI/CD?
Oh, it's super important because, number one, I just want to state clearly that a professional software engineer should be a business person solving business problems with code, not a coder. And so the focus is really, how do we decompose that business problem so that we can flow value most effectively? And so that goes back to the domain-driven design I was talking about before. Domain-driven design is focused on modeling systems after the business, ultimately. Right. We're using business terms all the way through every piece of documentation, all the way down through the stack. The same word means the same thing all the way to the database level. Right. And so business architecture and aligning the architecture of the business for the product delivery at speed is critical. CD will not solve your problems if you've got tight dependencies between teams.
Yeah, and the coupling is tough, right? Because even if you look at domains, right, you look at payment systems versus the user domain versus the billing versus the products, right? They will have some dependencies, right? I mean, we're never going to find.
You're not, but they don't have to be hard dependencies. You can make them soft dependencies, right? I mean, that's having stable contracts between domains is how you get that done.
Right. So, explain that to people a little bit. That's why it's a leading question for you to describe it.
Basically, if two domains have to be able to communicate with each other in a way that they understand each other, right? And that we agree that that's our handshake, that we will talk to each other this way, that this word means this thing to me, right? I'm not going to go and, if you send me information, I'm not going to go and mutate it and send it downstream for somebody else and corrupt that data. That we have behaviors that we're going to perform so that we can talk the same way to each other. And doing things like, okay, I'm going to need a new feature. I'm going to deliver a new feature. To implement this new feature fully, I'm going to need a new set of data from you, right? And so before we do anything, we establish how that data communication will look. We establish that communication contract. Typically, if you're looking at services, it's what's the API between the services, right? But whatever the communication contract is, even if it's email, this is what it's going to look like, right? Mm-hmm. And then we test for that communication looking like that before we do anything else. They're doing contract-driven development. We start with the contract. And then at that point, each of us can run independently of each other and deploy independently of each other. If I'm the consumer of that contract, I just need to make sure that I'm developing in such a way that I can deploy changes and validate the features against that contract, but not try to implement anything, not try to activate the new feature until the contract has been fulfilled by the provider in production. And that
how do you find the right way to document those contracts? Is there a process to do that between the two teams?
I'm a big fan of Open API. If you're
Mm-hmm.
if you're using REST for services, that
Mm-hmm.
you now have a standard way to document a contract that's testable with tooling. I would always bias any sort of application contract towards what has the best tooling support for validating the contract, not which one do I prefer. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use Swagger and Open API and REST because the tooling is really mature,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I can, and we're building Holocron right now. We've got several contracts, internal and external, all documented with Open API, all testable on every single build that makes sure we're not validating, we're not breaking those contracts, because the contract's the most important thing. That's the thing that allows anything to be independent of anything else. That we turn a hard dependency into a soft dependency. You're going to have dependencies, but they need to be soft dependencies.
Yeah, and I guess you were talking, about a lot of companies you've been talking to that are building dashboards and different things.
Yeah.
I'm surprised there's not one, kind of merger of this work into a CNCF or Linux Foundation or whatever open source projects. What's the vision for the work you're doing with P1 in terms of making this kind of broadly available to others?
So, Hygeia has been an open source project for metrics for a while. It's really focused on pipeline health. I want, we're leveraging Hygeia for back-end data collection, but I really want, the visualization with the training embedded into it, open sourced. I mean, it's currently on Repo One, but I want it to be useful to people, not just Platform One. I mean, to be useful to Platform One, that's great, but that's not really it's a tool that I've wanted for a long time. There are commercial, not very many. I have seen 2 commercial tools that are operating under the same mindset that we're operating under building ours. But ours is the only open source solution I'm aware of that's focused on helping teams improve delivery versus measuring teams into submission.
And I guess we need to push the leadership at Platform One to, to really maybe think about how to transition this to a CNCF project, because the adoption of more organizations will guarantee the success of something like this, right?
Yeah, and we've been working that way since day one. We've been really trying to make sure our documentation's good on the project. That we're keeping our code as clean as we can. Doing everything we can to make it helpful and easy for people to onboard into the project. We have an internal OKR that we wanted open source. We want contributors. And so, the more we get that, the more we can test how well we're doing that. And we can improve our open source processes and make the product even easier.
So we have a last question before we let you go. But Tim was asking, how do you handle the definition management so everyone is using the same terms the same way?
Someone who's directing an organization of any size. So manager could be, someone, in some ways a tech lead could be a manager. Different organizations handle different things different ways. VP is obviously a manager, but it's whoever's setting the direction. And direction needs to be set. I mean, the self-organizing teams self-organize around a goal, they don't self-organize around random vapor, right? So there has to be some sort of direction coming from somewhere that things are happening, that we're going this way, guys.
Yeah. And no, you don't need SAFe for that.
No, you don't need SAFe for that, no.
I think it does really.
You can use like actual engineering and actual teamwork and get things done a lot faster. I mean, we saw a massive improvement when we focused on CD and did away with all the SAFe ceremony.
Right. Any last parting words for the group here? Any more wisdom? You shared a lot today, but I wanted to give you the last word. And before we let everybody go, I wanted to also mention a few dates. So I'll let you do a quick goodbye, but then I'll mention a few dates for the next episode. So over to you.
I just mentioned everybody that software development is a complex human-oriented activity. Humans are doing it for humans. It's not. There's no way to predict how things are going to come from it. Every team has its own context. They have their own team culture, their own delivery problem, their own application culture. You can't just go and cookie cutter solutions on stuff. You actually have to do real work to be a leader. You can't just lead by proxy. So if you're going to use dashboards, understand what dashboards are for. Learn what the metrics actually are telling you. Educate yourself. I'm writing a paper for IT Revolution on this that'll be out, I think, next month or the month after, that talks about these problems. But there's no easy path for this. You have to actually work if you want things to get better.
There we go. Nothing is free in life. So a couple of dates. Next Tuesday, 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have Anand Kulkarni, and we'll talk about low-code, no-code. And, I'm not a big fan of low-code, no-code. So if you want to see what a real debate looks like, that's going to be interesting. And actually, I was intrigued by his approach, kind of removing a lot of my objections. So I love for you to see it too, because I think it's interesting to compare.
Yeah, I'll definitely see if I can improve my my outlook on that.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess it's still going to be an interesting debate. But March 1st, we have Lauren Nelsenberger, the Air Force and Space Force CIO. The 8th, we have same time, 1 p.m. Jay Bonchi, the Air Force and Space Force CTO. On the 15th, we have Raja, the Otimo CEO, who's been really helping a lot with Platform One and other government projects, but also have commercial engagements as well. The 22nd, I have a special team joining us from the DoD, and I'm not going to disclose it yet, but it's an actual team that does the work, not just a bunch of people like me that just talk about others doing the work, but actually people that do the work. And those are pretty interesting people that are going to join us, that are in the military right now, that are going to join us to talk about their stuff. And potentially we're still vetting the date, but the 29th, I think we're going to get General Olson, who is the first Air Force and Space Force Chief Data and AI Officer. So it's going to be fun as well. So if that's not enough for you to register, I don't know what I have to do, because I can't come up with better things. So that should be plenty to get you excited. And to do that, you have the link at the bottom of the screen, ama.preventbridge.com/register. Register for the show, and please stay safe, stay healthy. And if you have any questions, never hesitate to reach out to us and shoot me an email. If you have ideas of next guests that you'd like to have on the show, also shoot us a note. We'll reach out to them and see if they want to join the show. So thanks so much. Thanks, Bryan, again, for taking the time and joining us today. A lot of amazing advice, and thank you so much for leaving Walmart and the cushy job to come and make a difference in the DoD as well.
I mean, it wasn't that cushy. I think it prepared me well for the DoD. But thank you for convincing me to come. It's
you could have gone to another company where you would have gotten a cushy job, that's for sure. So,
but I've been bored.
Here we go. So, yeah. Good pick, and stay for a while. We need more of you. So, thanks everybody. Stay safe. Thanks, Bryan.
Thanks.